She grew up in the Bronx and now lives in Schenectady, New York, where she was one of the founders and teachers of an alternative ungraded public school. Her work has appeared in The Stories We Hold Secret, in a collection of essays called Small Town Gay, and other journals. In 2010, she received a second place for memoir in the Pacific Northwest Writers Association annual literary contest. Her essay, Askew, was just published in Bellevue Literary Review, where it won first place for nonfiction. Esther will grace our stage today with an extraordinary combination of an essay that she's written with poetry that her daughter Andrea wrote before her death. Esther Willison, reading Andrea.
In the fall of 1992, I had come to take Andrea home to our apartment in Albany from Four Winds, a private psychiatric hospital in Saratoga Springs. I thought it would be a cure for her because the place had a really good reputation. We sat in the doctor's office and talked, and Andrea was asking me to buy her a whole list of things for her apartment, and I was trying to compromise on that list. We had been through this many times. It was going fairly well until we got to the microwave. She asked for one, and I said, well, let's wait and see if you can find the one that you had. Andrea had a habit of leaving things behind when she moved, and so we couldn't agree on the microwave. She became more and more angry, and then she picked up a glass ashtray, and she threw it at me, and I ducked. She left the room, and I sat there quietly in slow motion, just staring at the doctor. The Accusation by Andrea Willison. My life is a fiery orange need as my heart explodes like a small volcano in my chest. I want to destroy everything I love. I can't bear this need for you, as if in your veins flow juices I need to survive, addicted as an alcoholic. If I pretended not to love how you breathe when we make love, or how you move beneath my hands, as if you dance to the beat of my heart, or how you live your life like a question mark I can only answer when we lie skin to skin together. If I pretended hard enough, I could deny your existence, or I could simply suffocate you in your sleep, so I wouldn't have to feel this angry fire in my chest. How dare you have the nerve to love me? After a few silent minutes of sitting in that room, I said to the doctor, well, it's not going to be a pleasant trip home, I guess. The doctor crossed her legs. You know, she began, I'm not telling you what to do, but if my daughter threw something at me, I might not want to give her a ride home. I'm going to leave you alone a few minutes so you can think about what you want to do, and then I'll come back. I sat there by myself, amazed. Why hadn't I thought of that? But how could I leave her there, stranded? How would she get back? When the doctor returned, I told the doctor I was leaving. And as I drove off, I felt both satisfied and terrified, relieved not to have to deal with Andrea's anger anymore that day, and scared she might be watching me desert her. After My Grandmother Died by Andrea Willison. After my grandmother died, my mother and I looked at each other for the first time, realizing we wouldn't always be alive together. I saw her as she is, a whole person with faults and weaknesses, with many strengths. Her love of life, her gentleness, her willingness to understand my need to be myself. She told me she had been standing on the deck of a ship with a railing just in front to hold on to keep her from falling in the ocean. She told me that her mother was that railing. I want to tell my mother, who's afraid now of falling. I think there really is no ocean, just a huge space made up of hearts and spirits, of people we have loved, who have arrived before us. But I guess she already knows this. What can I tell her to make her feel less empty? Mother, you have always been my railing. On the way home from Saratoga, I listened to Thai music that Judith, Andrea's sister, had brought back for me from Thailand. Gourd instruments, banging and scraping rhythmically, a powerful beat that never breaks. And in the background, people are wailing, "Ay, yai, yai." I don't know what the Thai people meant, but I wailed with them, keeping to their mournful sound. I wailed and carried on in my car all the way home. But I am Andrea's mother, and I know that Andrea's sum total wasn't just her mental illness. She was insightful, a quick-witted young woman with a keen sense of humor, someone you would remember if you met her. She was more courageous than I ever was, and she taught me how to take risks. She was a political activist, everything from gay rights to animal rights. She loved horses. She learned to ride as a kid. One summer, my husband and I rented a house in North Bennington, and the house came with a horse, Kite, a big old yellowish white stallion with white eyelashes and a soft mouth, and no one had ridden him for a long time. But Andrea was determined to do so, and Kate would graze a while and then gallop up to the top of this hillside, and he seemed so far away, and then suddenly he'd shake his head and he'd come running down that hill full speed. "He'll never touch you," she told me. "He'll just come galloping over and stop." She was right. She used to go into that field with a handful of oats, and she'd stretch out her hand, waiting for him to come to her. And he would see her from the top of the hill and shake his head, his white mane rippling in the sun, and then he'd charge down the hill, and I could hardly look. I'd be so scared. But sure enough, he'd stop just short of her, and in one hand she'd have the oats, her palm open, and the other she held the halter down by her side, almost hidden. And then he'd start to lick the oats out of her hand, his soft pink mouth kind of nibbling. And she'd talk to him in the gentlest voice, and she'd coax him and praise him, love him, and rest her head against his. And then, while he was still eating and she was still talking, she'd slip that halter around his head and clip the straps together. And he'd whinny sometimes, but he let her lead him into the barn where she put the saddle on. And then she'd ride. I see her so clearly now, standing in that field, the oats in one hand and the reins in the other, and that big old horse looking at her from under his white eyelashes. I know I will always be looking for my honey, and I know she will come to me sometimes. And when Judith and I are together and we hug, we conjure her up. I know her absence will still be unbearable sometimes, and I know my life is less without her. But now spring is real for me. After she died, spring didn't exist. I resented every warm moment, and now I open up with the crocuses. I watch them carefully to see if they will survive the frost, and they do.